Greetings, mathematicians of all ages. Today we're going to learn about patterns in number sense. Patterns are all around in the world. We've seen them most of our lives. In the lower grades, we spend time looking at shapes and seeing if we can find a pattern in those. So that's how I'd like to start today's lesson. I'm going to start with some pretty basic shapes here. I'm going to give you the first three shapes in a pattern with my best handwriting I can here. And I'd like you to look at these first three shapes. And I want you to try to think about how the pattern would extend if I were to extend those shapes. And yes, you have to pretend that those are all perfect squares. Okay, so think about that a second. If you need longer than a second, go ahead and pause the video and give it 6 seconds. And of course, if we're going to draw the next few, here's how they're going to look. Once again, phenomenal drawing. And those boxes here onto that side. And we have shapes 4 and 5 in the pattern. Now if I can back up to our shapes 1, 2, and 3, most of us can see we have an original shape on shape 1. All we did was simply add a box on each side. Then we added 2 boxes on each side. And if I can skip ahead a bit here again, you can see then we added 3 boxes on each side of the original box. And of course, 4 boxes on each side. So a perfectly good shape pattern. Now, let's move on here. Let's just take a look at another shape pattern. Let's use boxes again. If I start with 1 and my second one looks like this, let's take a look at that a minute. Again, this is my first shape. Here's my second shape. And my third shape looks like this. Perhaps you can see the next 2 shapes that are going to happen in the pattern. Take a look at that once more. You can see this time we're adding 2 and 2, and then 4 to this side, 4 to this side. So if we add 2 and then 4, that's right, you guessed it. The next one should have 6 extending from the top and from the right. So 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes. 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes. This would be the 4th. And of course the pattern goes on, a 5th and a 6th shape, and on and on and on. But enough with shapes. Let's move into numbers and number patterns. Again, these, you've done a lot of these in the past, and usually we pick fairly obvious patterns to get you used to patterns and, in fact, to get you to know your basic facts. So even if you start with a very basic pattern like this, and probably in the lower grades the teacher wouldn't have put dots, they would have said box, box, box. Who can tell me what goes in the next 3 boxes? And most of us just realize that's counting by ones, right? Another, I guess, simple one would be this, and they'd say what comes next. And there we're counting by 5s. So we count by our basic facts, so we learn 5 times 1, 5 times 2, 5 times 3, and so on as we get going. In 6th grade, we're going to make that slightly trickier, but not much. And instead, now I'm going to give you 3 numbers. Let's go 1, 4, 7. And I want you to see if you can figure out the next 3 numbers in the pattern. Pause if you need some time. I'd like you to look at what's changing each time as we go, and the same thing is happening in both cases. We're adding 3 to both numbers. So if I'm going to do 7 plus 3, that's going to be 10. If I'm going to add 3 again, that's going to be 13. Adding 3 again, I'm going to get 16. And so on. They keep going. Let's take a look at another. How about this one? 2, 4, 8. And it keeps going. I'd like you to try to figure out the next 3 in that. Now we might want to say, well, this one's adding 2, and this one's adding 4, and that could potentially be a pattern. But what we're trying to do today is figure out what I'm doing. It's basically a repeating rule. So something that I can say 2, and I do something to it to get 4, and then do that exact same thing to get from 4 to 8. Okay? To figure that out, we have to step out of the addition realm, go to other operations like multiplication. You can see I do 2 times 2 to get 4, times 2 to get 8, which means the next one will be 16. The one after that will be 32, and so on, 64. And we could keep going. Probably some good calculator work if we want to keep going there. So I can certainly add the same number each time. I can definitely multiply the same number. I can divide, I can subtract to find the next 3. The other thing, though, we want to do today is not only find the next 3 numbers, but we also want to be able to write a rule that goes along with the pattern. So if we're looking at this first one, and rules are always going to have the same form. So why don't I get a clean sheet here and just give you that basic form. It's always going to look like this. Start with something and do something repeatedly. Every single rule that you write for this assignment, for these patterns, for these repeating patterns, is going to be start with something and do something repeatedly. Now, if we jump back to our last one, let's go to the addition one here. So there's our addition. It's pretty obvious what we're starting with. Looks like a 1. And then each time we're adding 3. So now if I go back to my big rule that I put there, all I'm going to say is start with 1. Start with 1. Is it going to let me? There we go. Start with 1 and add 3 repeatedly. So this first line is always going to have a number, and the second line is always going to have a rule. Add something, subtract something, multiply by something, or divide by something. So if I can back up to our basic one there and jump back to my second pattern here, you can see we started with 2 and multiplied by 2 repeatedly. So if I was going to put that into my basic one here, that will start with 2 and multiply by 2 repeatedly. Okay. Now every year I have students, they get the starts with, they get the rule, and that's fine, but they forget the repeatedly. And that is an issue. It is an issue because, once again, if we jump back to it, if we look at my last pattern here, if the pattern for that was start with 2 and multiply by 2, the entire pattern would look like 2, 4. Because if I simply say start with 2 and multiply by 2, the whole pattern would be 2, 4. And I actually want it to keep going. I do, even after the 64. So I need that repeatedly in there. Need it in there. Okay. So let's get back to our basic here. All right. So that's our rule for today. And again, it can be any operation. So why don't we just try one more? Let's get to the end here. Clean slate. Let's just do one more. We'll go 24, 21, 18, 15. All right. Your goal is to find the next three and write a rule. So pause at a moment. Think about that. Try it. Now that you've unpaused, many of you figured out, and in the past you probably just would have, if your teacher said, what's the pattern? You probably would have said -3. And -3 is right, that's true. You're subtracting 3 each time. But now as a 6th grader, I expect you to write the entire rule every time. So this one, it's going to take the exact same form. Start with 24. So start with something, just like we did before. And do something repeatedly. And we said it's -3. And we're going to use the word subtract, more of a 6th grade word. Subtract 3. And we need that repeatedly. Again, if I didn't have the repeatedly, my whole sequence, my whole pattern would be start with 24 and subtract 3. And I'd be done right there. I don't want to be. I want it to keep going. So I have to do it repeatedly. There's our rule, which means our next 3 terms are 12, 9, and 6. So patterns all around us, in shapes, in numbers, and the goal for today was learning number patterns, being able to state the next 3 terms in a number pattern, and then being able to write a rule that goes along with it. All right, see you next time.